In this walkthrough video, we're going to be looking at the blue square section of Unit 3. And in the blue square section for our learning target, it says I can model the phases of the moon, and I understand the role of the moon and sun in both tides on Earth and the seasons of the Earth. So we're looking at phases of the moon, tides, and seasons during the blue square section. And as you can see, all of the blue square tasks will be due February 19th. So let's look at each task. Task 1 is a set of notes. There's going to be 3 such notes during this unit, and here's my advice to you. I found what I think are really good descriptive videos for phases of the moon and seasons and tides, but they're not videos that I specifically made, so they don't exactly align to these notes. I pulled some information from the videos to make the note sheet, but there's lots of extra information as well. So here's my advice. Just click and play the video. Watch it really closely, paying great attention to it, and take in all of the information that you can. You don't need to worry about filling out the notes the first time around. Just watch the video and learn from it and soak in the details because they're really great. Then go on to the task 1B where it says Moon Notes Continued and watch the video that I have made. It's much more specific to filling out the note sheet, but it lacks some of the great detail that's in the first video. So it's really important that you watch both videos every time we do a note set in this blue square section here. Task 2 is just a clarification, because as good as both of these videos are, they talk about the phases of the moon, but they don't really show you where the moon is in relation to the sun and earth during each phase. And this Brain Pop video does. So this video will help to show you when it's in full moon, where is the moon in relation to the earth and the sun? When it's a waxing gibbous moon, where is the moon in relation to the earth and the sun? So that's a really good video to watch to help actually model where the moon, sun, and earth are during the different phases of the moon. Task 3 is going to switch to tides. You do not need to write down anything for task 3, but being in a landlocked state, I think it's very likely that many of you have never seen a tide or don't even know what they are. So it just says on Earth, tides are the repeated rising and falling of sea levels that happen twice a day. And then I give a demonstration of a tide below. So just click to watch this video and you can see how the rising and lowering of the sea levels due to tides affect this landscape here. Task 4 is a gizmo simulation on tides. It's a Google Classroom assignment. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. You'll find it by clicking on your class period link below. So the assignment says, use the instructions from my website in Google Doc to complete the assignment. Make sure to turn your work in when you've finished. So that document is here. And the first blue text here launches the simulation. So you can click that to access the actual gizmo. Keep in mind, like it says, this is a 5-minute preview unless if you log in. We've all created an account by now, so make sure you log in. If it takes you back to this page, you're not going to see it. You can click on the class period and it still won't show you the tides in here. So you can just close that out really quick, reopen the simulation, and it will take you directly to, you're still logged in, and you can run this simulation for much more than 5 minutes. So the first 4 questions are just breaking down the 28-day cycle of the moon into 7-day stretches, right? 28 divided by 4 is 7, and you're just going to pay attention to the high tides only. We're not ever going to be paying attention to the low tides. We're not that interested in them. So you can see the tide goes lower, goes back higher again, and then we have another low tide, and another high tide. You want to make sure that you are showing the tidal bands and you're showing the value, which will tell you the actual depth of the water during the low and high tide. And during the first 7 days, for the first question, you're focusing on, are the high tides getting higher or lower? So the very first high tide we see is 5.9 meters. You can already see on day 3, it's now only 5.6 meters high. So we can watch one more. When we get to day 4 here, the high tide is only 5.4 meters. So it's becoming clear that during the first 7 days, the high tides are becoming smaller. So then at day 7, I stopped it at 4. You would stop it at day 7. You'd pause it. You would go back in. And you could say during the first 7 days, the tides are becoming smaller. The high tides are becoming smaller. You must use a complete sentence. If you write the word smaller, it is wrong. Use a complete sentence. And then you're going to go from day 8 to day 14. Are the high tides getting smaller or larger? Same for the 15th to the 21st. And then there's 4 more questions. It says, run the simulation so that the high tide is the largest it ever is. And I've already stated that the high tide, the biggest high tide we see is 5.9 meters. And here's a nice trick. When it's paused, you can just move the moon around. Right, I can just go through these days really, really rapidly by moving the moon. And I'm looking for a 5.9 meter high tide. Play this for just a second. Let's go back a little bit more. There's a 5.9 meter high tide. That's as high as it ever gets. And it says to take a screenshot. I do that by clicking the camera. I want the position of the sun, the moon, Earth, and the moon. So I take the screenshot, right click to copy the image, Control V to paste the image in. That is answering that question. I just need a screenshot. Notice the name in the top right corner of spring tide. The next question is asking you to find the smallest high tide. Really important here. You're still looking for a high tide. Don't place the person in a low tide. Right, so this is a person in a low tide, but it's still a spring tide. So this is still a setup of the highest possible tides. Instead, you want to figure out where is this moon when the person is still in the high tide region, when they're still in that high tide bubble. But how small can this get? You can see this particular high tide is at 5.2 meters. Can you find one that's even smaller? When you do, you'll take the picture, right click, copy it in. And then the last 2 questions are just asking you about the sun's positions. And you might notice that sometimes they form a straight line, the sun, earth, and the moon. Sometimes they form not a straight line. And you're going to talk about those positions for the highest high tides and the lowest high tides. Task 5 is going to clarify what you've just learned with a set of tide notes. Again, watch the first video. Don't worry about filling out the notes. Just watch it, listen, and learn. And then watch the video I've made where it says Tides Notes Clarification. Watch that video while filling out your note sheet. After that, we're going to start on seasons. We start with notes this time on seasons. Same thing. Watch the Crash Course Kids video on seasons. Watch for all the details. Just listen and watch and pay attention. And then you can watch my video to actually fill out the note sheet. And then finally, putting it all together is modeling the sun, the earth, and the moon. And this puts everything that we've learned through this Blue Square unit together. It's a Google Classroom assignment that you'll open up from my website. And here's how it works. Each thing in here is just a stock picture of the sun, the earth, and a moon. And then each cell gives you a description. So in this first one, it says you need to model a full moon during winter in the northern hemisphere. To edit each picture, you just double click and it opens up the drawing that I've made. And you just move these objects around. You just click to drag them so it represents. So we need a full moon in the winter in the northern hemisphere. Let's start with this season. To be winter in the northern hemisphere needs to be tilted away from the sun. As it is right now, the northern hemisphere is tilted towards the sun. So I'm going to move the sun over here and the earth over here. And now I have the northern hemisphere tilted away from the sun, representing winter. The next is finding the full moon. And to me, it's always easiest to start with a new moon. That's the first phase we looked at in our phases of the moon notes. And then we can progress around counterclockwise from there. So a new moon is when the moon is in between the sun and the earth. And then we can go through each phase. 1/8 of the way around makes that now a waxing crescent. We have a waxing crescent moon. 1/4 of a way around the earth is a first quarter moon. One more eighth, so going around now 3/8 of the way, we have a waxing gibbous moon. Halfway around the moon, it's now a full moon. You would only see the lit side of the moon, and that's what we are looking for in this particular example, a full moon during winter in the northern hemisphere. So you would actually stop here and hit save and close, and that would be your final answer, but I'm going to go through the rest of the phases of the moon as well. Another eighth of a turn gives us a waning gibbous. You're still seeing a mostly lit moon, but the shadow side will be growing every day at this point. We get to 3/4, and this is a 3/4 moon. This is the third quarter. And finally, you would have a waning crescent before returning to a new moon. So when you're determining the phase of the moon, I think it's helpful to start as a new moon and then just work your way around counterclockwise, following the cycles in your notes. So that is the last assignment. At that point, you just need to show me your notes. If you haven't been showing me going through in class, you'll show me your notes, and then you'll take the level up quiz until you get a 100% score. I know this is a lot of information for this one, but thanks for watching the walkthrough video.